Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin.
The fluorescent lights in Murphy's bar cast everything in harsh yellow, making the wood tables look cheap and the beer bottles look dirty. Marissa Caldwell sat across from Nolan Harker, watching him lean back in his chair like he owned the place. At 31, she'd worked enough double shifts in the ER to know when someone was putting on a show. Remember that time Jake tried to fix his own car? Nolan's voice carried over the table to their friends. Idiot nearly blew up his garage. Casey laughed and nudged her boyfriend Lyle. At least he tried. Some people just call mechanics for everything. Hey, nothing wrong with knowing your limits, Lyle said, raising his bottle. Marissa took a small sip of her beer and checked her phone. Tomorrow she had another 12-hour shift starting at 6 a.m. She'd already been at the hospital for 3 straight days this week, dealing with overdoses and car accidents and people who came to the ER because they had a cold. Her scrub still smelled like antiseptic even though she'd showered twice. "You're quiet tonight," Casey said, turning to her. "Everything okay?" "Just tired." Marissa set down her beer. "Long week." "She's always tired," Nolan said, not looking at her. "Works too much." "Someone has to pay the rent," Marissa said. The table went quiet for a second. Lyle coughed and took a drink. Casey studied her fingernails. "Speaking of which," Marissa said, keeping her voice light, "what time are you heading out tomorrow? So I know when to expect you back." Nolan's chair scraped against the floor as he shifted. "Expect me back? What am I, 15? I'm just asking when you'll be home." "Don't know yet. Depends on what we end up doing." Marissa felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Who exactly are you going with this weekend?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Nolan's face went red and he barked out a laugh that didn't sound funny at all. "Stop acting like we're married. You don't get a say in where I go or who I'm with." Casey's eyes went wide. Lyle nearly choked on his beer. Someone at the next table turned to look. Marissa felt every muscle in her face go still. She'd learned this trick in the ER when families yelled at her about wait times or insurance problems. Show nothing. Give them nothing to work with. "Okay," she said. Nolan kept talking, his voice getting louder. "I mean, seriously. We've been together 2 years, not 20. I can go camping with friends without getting the 3rd degree." "You're right," Marissa said. She picked up her purse and stood. "I need to use the bathroom." She walked across the sticky floor to the women's room, past tables full of people having normal Friday night conversations. The bathroom smelled like bleach and cheap air freshener. She stared at herself in the cracked mirror above the sink. Her reflection looked back at her with dark eyes that had seen too much. She'd inherited her mother's sharp cheekbones and her father's stubborn jaw. Right now, both served her well. 2 years. 2 years of Nolan coming home smelling like other people's perfume and claiming he'd been out with the guys. 2 years of him borrowing money for his truck payment and forgetting to pay her back. 2 years of him making jokes about her job while she worked 60-hour weeks to keep them afloat. She splashed cold water on her face and dried her hands with rough paper towels. When she walked back to the table, the conversation had shifted to baseball. Everyone was trying too hard to act normal. "Ready to go?" she asked Nolan. "Already." He checked his phone. "It's not even 10. I have work in the morning." "You always have work in the morning. That's how jobs work." Nolan sighed and threw some bills on the table. "Fine, let's go." They said goodbye to Casey and Lyle, who both hugged Marissa a little too tight. Outside, the night air felt good after the stale bar atmosphere. Nolan walked to the driver's side of Marissa's Honda Civic without asking. "I'll drive," he said. "You've been drinking." 2 beers over 3 hours. "I'm fine." Marissa handed him the keys because it wasn't worth fighting about. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot too fast, making the tires squeal. "You embarrass me in there," he said. "How?" Acting all suspicious, asking who I'm going with like you're my mother. Marissa watched the streetlights pass by her window. "I asked a simple question." It wasn't simple. It was loaded. If it was a simple question, you would have given a simple answer. Nolan turned the radio up loud enough to end the conversation. Some country song about losing your girl and drinking beer. Marissa closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. A.T. home. Nolan grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and turned on the TV. Marissa went to the bedroom and laid out her scrubs for tomorrow. She could hear him laughing at some late-night talk show in the living room. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off her shoes. The apartment was quiet except for the TV and the hum of the air conditioner. Everything in this place was hers. The lease she'd signed alone because Nolan's credit was shot. The furniture she'd bought with money from extra shifts. The utilities she paid every month while he talked about getting his own place someday soon. But someday soon never came. It was always next month, after he fixed this truck or helped that friend or caught up on whatever excuse he was using. Marissa changed into her pajamas and brushed her teeth. In the mirror, she saw the same face that had stared back at her in the bar bathroom. The same dark eyes that had watched her mother cry over her father's empty promises. The same mouth that had learned to stay shut rather than start a fight that would go nowhere. She'd sworn she wouldn't end up like her mother. She'd sworn she wouldn't waste her life waiting for a man to grow up. When she walked back to the bedroom, Nolan was still on the couch. She could see the blue glow of the TV under the closed door. "Night," she called. "Yeah," he called back. Marissa got into bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow he would leave with whoever he was going with, and she would work her shift and come home to an empty apartment. Next week he would have some story about what a great time he had, and she would nod and pretend she believed him. But tonight, something had changed. Tonight, he'd made it clear where she stood. "Stop acting like we're married. You don't get a say. Fine." He was right. She wasn't his wife. She wasn't even his girlfriend, apparently. She was just someone who paid his bills and gave him a place to sleep. Marissa rolled over and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Outside, a police siren wailed in the distance, heading toward someone else's emergency. Saturday morning came too early. Marissa's alarm went off at 5:30, but she was already awake. She'd been lying in bed listening to Nolan move around the apartment for the past 20 minutes. She heard him in the kitchen, opening cabinets and running water. The shower turned on and off. A drawer slammed shut. His boots crossed the living room floor, back and forth like he was pacing. Marissa stayed in bed with her eyes closed, pretending to sleep. She didn't want to have another conversation about his plans. She didn't want to watch him pack a bag for his camping trip, or whatever lie he'd settled on. The front door opened and closed with a bang that shook the thin walls. A car engine started in the parking lot below. Marissa got up and walked to the window. Nolan was throwing a duffel bag into the trunk of a red SUV she didn't recognize. The morning sun made everything look too bright and cheerful. A woman sat in the driver's seat, but Marissa couldn't see her face through the tinted windows. Nolan got into the passenger seat without looking back at the apartment. The SUV pulled away, leaving skid marks on the asphalt. Marissa stood at the window long after they were gone. The parking lot looked empty except for a few cars that belonged to people who worked night shifts or had nowhere else to go. She showered and got dressed for work. Her scrubs felt stiff and clean, like armor. She made coffee in the kitchen and ate a piece of toast standing up. The apartment felt different without Nolan's energy filling it up. Quieter. Cleaner. At the hospital. She checked on her patients and dispensed medications and dealt with the usual chaos. A man came in with chest pains that turned out to be anxiety. A woman brought her baby in with a fever that broke before they could run tests. A teenager overdosed in the parking lot and had to be revived with Narcan. "Rough morning," said Dr. Peterson, passing her in the hallway. "Just another Saturday." Marissa said that by 2 o'clock The emergency rush had died down to the usual weekend flow of minor injuries and people who should have gone to urgent care. Marissa took her break in the staff lounge, eating a sandwich from the vending machine and scrolling through her phone that no messages from Nolan. Not that she'd expected any. She drove home thinking about groceries and laundry and all the normal weekend tasks that waited for her. The apartment complex looked the same as always, all brick and concrete and windows that reflected the afternoon sun. Marissa parked in her usual spot and grabbed her purse from the passenger seat. The stairs to her second-floor apartment creaked under her feet, a sound so familiar she usually didn't notice it. "Hey, Marissa." She turned to see Ivy Rosario coming up the stairs behind her, carrying a basket of clean laundry. Ivy lived across the hall and worked at the CVS pharmacy down the street. They weren't close friends, but they looked out for each other the way neighbors do in places where people come and go. "Hey, Ivy. How's your day off?" "Can't complain. Caught up on sleep, did some cleaning." Ivy shifted the basket to her hip. "Listen, I don't want to get in your business, but I saw Nolan this morning." Marissa stopped with her key halfway to the lock. "Okay. He left around 6 with some woman in a red SUV. I was taking out the trash and couldn't help but notice." Ivy's voice was careful, like she was testing the water. "Not my business, but I thought you should know." Marissa felt something settle in her chest, heavy and final. She'd known, of course. Part of her had known for months, but knowing and having it confirmed were different things. "Thanks, Ivy. That's all I needed." Ivy studied her face. "You okay?" "I'm fine." Marissa turned the key in the lock. "See you later." Inside the apartment, she set her purse on the kitchen counter and looked around. Everything was exactly as she'd left it this morning, except for the coffee cup Nolan had used and left in the sink. 2 rings of brown stains on white ceramic like evidence of a crime. She washed the cup and dried it and put it back in the cabinet. Then she walked through the living room, the bedroom, the bathroom, taking inventory of what belonged to whom. The couch was hers. The TV was hers. The bed, the dresser, the nightstands, all hers. Nolan's clothes took up half the closet, but everything else in the apartment bore her fingerprints. Her name on the lease. Her money spent on furniture and dishes and the 100 small things that turned an empty space into a home. Marissa sat down at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. She pulled up the lease agreement she'd signed 18 months ago. Nolan's name appeared nowhere on the document. He wasn't even listed as an approved resident. She opened her checking account and scrolled through 2 months of automatic payments. Rent, electric, gas, water, internet, car insurance. All coming out of her account. All in her name. Her phone buzzed with a text from Casey. "Are you okay after last night? Want to talk?" Marissa stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "I'm fine. Just tired." Nolan was out of line. Yes, he was. "Do you want company? Lyle and I could come over." "Thanks, but I need some time to think." She set the phone aside and walked to the window. The parking lot was filling up as people came home from work or errands or whatever they did on Saturday afternoons. Normal people living normal lives, dealing with normal problems. But Marissa's problem wasn't normal. Her problem was that she'd been living with a man who thought she had no right to ask where he was going or when he'd be back. A man who borrowed her car and used her address and ate her food while telling her she didn't get a say in his life. The apartment felt larger without him in it. Cleaner. Like she could finally breathe without worrying about setting him off or asking the wrong question. Her phone rang. For a second, her heart jumped, thinking it might be Nolan calling to explain or apologize. But the number on the screen belonged to her mother. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, honey. I was just thinking about you. How are things?" Marissa closed her eyes. Her mother's voice sounded thin and tired, the way it always did since the divorce. "Things are fine. How are you?" "Oh, you know. Same as always. I was cleaning out some boxes and found your old school pictures. You were such a serious little girl. I was thinking about Dad this morning. Were you? Her mother's voice got even quieter. Why is that? Just wondering how you knew it was time to leave him. The line went quiet for so long that Marissa thought the call had dropped. Mom, I'm here. I guess I knew when I realized I was asking him for permission to exist in my own life. Her mother paused. Why are you asking Marissa? No reason. Just curious. Is everything okay with Nolan? Marissa watched a woman in the parking lot struggle with grocery bags while trying to unlock her car. A man passing by stopped to help her. Such a small kindness, but the woman's face lit up with gratitude. I need to go, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow. Okay, honey. I love you. Love you too. Marissa hung up and sat down on the couch. The afternoon sun came through the windows, making patterns on the carpet. Everything was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of children playing outside. She thought about her mother's words. Asking for permission to exist in your own life. That's exactly what she'd been doing with Nolan. Asking permission to know where he was going. Asking permission to have an opinion about their relationship. Asking permission to expect basic honesty from the person she shared her bed with. But he'd made it clear last night. She didn't get to ask. She didn't get a say. Fine. He was right. She didn't get a say in his life, but he didn't get one in hers either. Saturday evening came slowly, the way it always did when Marissa had too much time to think. She ordered Chinese takeout and ate it standing in the kitchen. Watching the sun set through the window above the sink, the apartment felt different with Nolan gone. Not empty exactly, but lighter somehow. Like a weight had been lifted that she hadn't realized she was carrying. She walked through the rooms again, this time paying attention to details she usually missed. The way her books were organized on the shelf by the window. The way her coffee cup had its own spot in the cabinet. The way her clothes hung in neat rows while Nolan's were always wrinkled and thrown wherever he dropped them. This was her space. Her home. She'd created it piece by piece with money she'd earned and choices she'd made. Nolan had just moved into it like a tenant who never paid rent. The thought made her angry in a way that surprised her. Not the hot, explosive anger that burned out quickly, but the cold, steady kind that settled in your bones and stayed there. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the contacts until she found the number for her apartment complex office. The voicemail said they were closed until Monday, but in case of emergency, residents could call the maintenance line. This wasn't an emergency, but it felt like one. Marissa hung up without leaving a message. Instead, she opened her laptop and searched for Locksmith, Charlotte, North Carolina, 24 hours. A dozen results popped up, complete with customer reviews and price estimates. Most of them offered same-day service for an extra fee. She clicked on the first one and read the website carefully. Standard lock changes took less than an hour. They accepted cash and credit cards. They were licensed and insured and guaranteed their work. Marissa closed the laptop and walked to the front door. She looked at the lock, really looked at it, for the first time in months. It was a standard deadbolt, the kind you'd find in any cheap apartment building. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. Just a simple mechanism that kept people out or let them in depending on whether they had the right key. Nolan's key ring sat on the kitchen counter, where he'd left it this morning. She picked it up and examined the 3 keys attached to it. One for his truck, which was old and bent. One for his toolbox at the garage where he worked. And one for her apartment. Her apartment. Not their apartment. Not his apartment. Hers. She went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea, something her mother had taught her to do when she needed to think. The ritual of heating water and steeping the bag and adding just a little honey helped her mind slow down and focus. The truth was simple. Nolan had made his position clear last night. He didn't want to be accountable to her. He didn't want to answer her questions or consider her feelings or treat her like a partner in any meaningful way. That he wanted all the benefits of living with her: free rent, free meals, free use of her car when his truck broke down, without any of the responsibilities that came with sharing a life with someone. and she'd let him get away with it because she was afraid of being alone. Because she thought having someone was better than having no one, even if that someone treated her like a convenience rather than a person. But sitting in her own apartment, surrounded by her own things, paid for with her own money, she realized she wasn't afraid anymore. She was tired of pretending this was a real relationship when it was just her taking care of a grown man who couldn't be bothered to grow up. Her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway. "Is this Marissa Caldwell?" The voice was male, professional. "Yes. This is Tom from Ace Locksmith. I got your online inquiry about changing locks. I have an opening tonight if you're still interested." Marissa hadn't realized she'd submitted an inquiry. She must have filled out a form while browsing their website without thinking about it. "What time?" she heard herself ask. "I could be there by 8:30. Standard deadbolt change runs about $90 plus the service call fee." Marissa looked at the clock on the microwave. 7:15. She had an hour to decide if she was really going to do this. "Can you make it 9 o'clock instead?" "Sure thing. I'll need your address and a phone number where I can reach you." She gave him the information, her voice steady and calm. When she hung up, her hands were shaking. She called Casey. "Hey," Casey said. "I was just thinking about you. Are you okay? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Okay. How long have you known about Nolan cheating?" The silence on the other end of the line told her everything she needed to know. "Marissa, how long, Casey?" "I didn't know for sure. I mean, there were rumors, but—" "How long?" Casey sighed. "Maybe 6 months. But I didn't have proof, and I wasn't sure how you'd react if I said something. You thought I'd blame you. I thought you'd shut me out. You do that sometimes when things get hard." Marissa closed her eyes. Casey was right. She did have a habit of pulling away from people when her life got complicated. It was easier than explaining or defending or admitting she'd made mistakes. "I'm changing the locks tonight," she said. "What?" "Nolan's gone for the weekend with whoever he's sleeping with now. When he comes back, his key won't work." "Holy shit. Are you serious?" "Dead serious." "Good." Casey's voice was fierce. "Good for you. Do you want us to come over? For moral support?" "No. This is something I need to do by myself." "Okay. But call me if you change your mind. Or if you need help moving his stuff out." "I will." "Marissa." "Yeah. I'm proud of you." After she hung up, Marissa walked through the apartment one more time. In the bedroom, Nolan's clothes were scattered on the floor, where he'd dropped them while packing this morning. His deodorant sat on the bathroom counter next to a razor that needed new blades. His work boots were kicked off by the front door, leaving mud stains on the carpet. Evidence of a life lived carelessly, without consideration for the person who would have to clean up after him. Marissa had been cleaning up after Nolan for 2 years. Picking up his clothes, paying his bills, making excuses for his behavior to friends and coworkers. She'd become his mother instead of his girlfriend, and she let it happen because she thought that was what relationships required. But her parents' marriage had taught her what happened when one person did all the work while the other person did whatever they wanted. It ended with lawyers and custody battles and 20 years of regret. She wasn't going to waste 20 years of her life waiting for Nolan to become the man he'd never shown any interest in being at exactly 9 o'clock. Someone knocked on her door. Marissa looked through the peephole and saw a middle-aged man in work clothes holding a toolbox. "Tom from Ace Locksmith." "That's me." She opened the door and let him in. He was probably 50, with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen enough of life to mind his own business. "So you need the deadbolt changed," he said, examining the lock. "Yes. This is a pretty standard setup. I can have you fixed up in about 30 minutes. He opened his toolbox and pulled out various tools. "Rough breakup." Marissa considered lying, giving him some story about lost keys or security concerns. but she was tired of lying, even to strangers. "Just correcting a mistake," she said. Tom nodded like he understood exactly what she meant. "Been there myself. Sometimes you got to know when to cut your losses." He worked quickly and efficiently, removing the old deadbolt and installing a new one. The sound of the drill was loud in the quiet apartment, but Marissa found it satisfying. The sound of change happening, of decisions being made. "You got any other keys floating around?" Tom asked as he tested the new lock. "Spare with a neighbor or family member?" "No, just the ones I'm keeping." He handed her 3 shiny new keys. "That'll be 120 with the service call." Marissa paid him in cash and walked him to the door. The new lock turned smoothly, with a solid click that sounded final. After he left, she sat on the couch and looked at the keys in her hand. 3 small pieces of metal that represented the biggest decision she'd made in years. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hey babe, having a great time. Wish you were here." Marissa stared at the message for a long time. Then she blocked the number and deleted the text. Tomorrow she would pack Nolan's belongings. Tomorrow she would deal with the aftermath of what she'd done tonight. But right now, she wanted to sit in her own apartment with her new keys in her hand and enjoy the silence. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't have to wonder when Nolan was coming home or what kind of mood he'd be in when he got there. She didn't have to brace herself for questions about her day or complaints about her job or lectures about how she worked too much. She could just exist in her own space, making her own choices, without asking anyone's permission. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of bright sunshine that made everything look possible. Marissa woke up naturally at 7:30, no alarm, no rush to get ready for work. She'd called in and taken a personal day, something she rarely did but felt necessary today. She made coffee in her quiet kitchen and sat at the table with her laptop, planning the rest of her Sunday like a military operation. First step: deal with Nolan's belongings before he came back from wherever he'd gone. The new keys sat on the counter where she'd left them last night, catching the morning light. Such small things to represent such a big change. Marissa had slept better than she had in months. No tossing and turning, no waking up when Nolan came to bed late, no listening to him snore or talk in his sleep. Just 8 hours of uninterrupted rest in her own space. She opened her laptop and searched for storage facilities near the apartment complex. A dozen options appeared, ranging from climate-controlled units that cost more than her car payment to basic concrete boxes that rented by the month. She chose something in the middle of a place called Secure Space Storage that was 10 minutes away and had good online reviews. Their website said they were open 7 days a week and accepted major credit cards. The phone rang twice before someone answered. Secure Space Storage, this is Janet. Hi, I need to rent a storage unit. Something small, just for boxes and clothes. We have 5x10 units available starting at $79 a month. When would you need it? Today, if possible. Today. Janet sounded surprised. Well, I suppose we could set that up. What's the name for the account? Marissa paused. She had Nolan's driver's license information memorized from filling out forms and applications over the years. His full legal name was Nolan James Harker. Born March 15, 1990. Address listed as her apartment because he'd never bothered to change it after moving in. Nolan Harker, she said. And you're authorized to rent on his behalf. I'm his girlfriend. We live together. The lie came easily, or maybe it wasn't a lie yet. Technically, they still live together for a few more hours. Okay, I'll need a credit card for the deposit and first month's rent. Marissa gave her the information, justifying it to herself as an advance on all the money Nolan owed her for utilities and groceries and the dozen other expenses she'd covered over the past 2 years. She could afford 1 month of storage rent. You're all set, Janet said. Unit 247. I'll text you the access code. After she hung up, Marissa felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Was she really doing this? Was she really about to pack up Nolan's life and move it into storage without telling him? But then she remembered his words from Friday night. You don't get a say in where I go or who I'm with. He'd made the rules of their relationship clear. She was just following them. She spent the next hour gathering supplies. Cardboard boxes from her last move, still folded flat in the bedroom closet. Packing tape from the kitchen drawer. Trash bags for things that were too old or worn to keep. Starting with the easiest room. She went into the bathroom and began sorting through Nolan's toiletries. Half-empty bottles of body wash and shampoo. A toothbrush that had seen better days. Prescription acne medication that was 3 months expired. She packed everything into a small box, not bothering to organize or separate items. This wasn't about being careful with his belongings. This was about removing them from her space as efficiently as possible. The bedroom took longer. Nolan's clothes filled half the closet and 2 drawers in the dresser. Work shirts that smelled like motor oil and cigarettes. Jeans with holes in the knees. A suit he'd worn to exactly 1 wedding in the 2 years they'd been together. Marissa folded each item carefully despite her anger. She'd been raised to treat other people's belongings with respect, even when those people didn't return the favor. His nightstand contained the usual collection of loose change, old receipts, and forgotten medications. She dumped everything into a grocery bag without looking too closely. She didn't want to find evidence of things she already knew were true. In the living room. Nolan's possessions were scattered like territorial markers. A PlayStation that hadn't been played in months. DVDs of action movies she'd never watched. A gym bag that had never seen the inside of a gym. The hardest part was deciding what actually belonged to him. The coffee table they'd bought together at a yard sale. The lamp he'd insisted on getting even though she thought it was ugly. The throw pillows he'd complained about but never bothered to replace. She erred on the side of generosity, packing anything that might arguably be his. Better to give him too much than too little. Better to avoid future arguments about who owned what. Why noon? She had filled 8 boxes and 3 large trash bags. Nolan's entire presence in her life, reduced to a pile of containers in the living room. The apartment looked bigger without his things cluttering the surfaces. Cleaner. More like the place she'd imagined when she'd first signed the lease. Loading everything into her Honda required 2 trips. The boxes fit in the trunk and back seat, but the trash bags had to ride in the passenger seat like an unwanted companion. The storage facility was exactly what she'd expected: rows of concrete buildings, surrounded by chain-link fencing and security cameras. Janet turned out to be a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes who didn't ask questions about why Marissa was renting storage on a Sunday afternoon. Unit 247 was clean and empty, with fluorescent lights that flickered on when she opened the metal door. It smelled like concrete and industrial cleaner. Nothing like the apartment that had been Nolan's home for 2 years. Marissa stacked the boxes against the back wall and left the trash bags near the door. It took less than 10 minutes to unload everything. 2 years of shared life erased in 10 minutes. She closed the unit and walked back to her car, the access code and unit key heavy in her pocket. Part of her felt guilty about what she'd done, but a larger part felt relieved, like she'd finally stopped carrying something that had been weighing her down for months. On the drive home, she stopped at a CVS to pick up contact solution and saw Ivy coming out of the store wearing her work vest. "Hey," Ivy said. "You're up early for a Sunday. Running errands. Are you going in or coming home?" "Just finished the morning shift. Someone called in sick." Ivy studied Marissa's face. "You look different today. Rested or something." "I slept well last night." "That's good. Hey, about yesterday, I hope I didn't overstep by telling you about Nolan. I just thought you should know." Marissa considered how much to share. Ivy seemed trustworthy, and she was going to need someone who could pass along information when Nolan inevitably came looking for answers. "You didn't overstep. Actually, I'm glad you told me." She paused. "I changed the locks last night." Ivy's eyes widened. Seriously? Seriously? and I packed his stuff and put it in storage. Holy shit. Ivy looked around the parking lot like she was checking for witnesses. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I need someone to give him the storage information when he comes looking for it, which he will. Of course, whatever you need. Ivy pulled out her phone. Give me the address. Marissa dictated the storage facility information, including the unit number and access code. Ivy saved everything in her contacts. This is probably going to get messy, Marissa said. Probably, but you're doing the right thing. I've seen enough women put up with cheating boyfriends to know how this ends if you don't take a stand. How does it end? With them getting married because she thinks that'll change him, then divorced 5 years later when she finally realizes it won't. Ivy shrugged. At least you're cutting your losses early. Back at the apartment, Marissa walked through the rooms one more time. Without Nolan's belongings, the space looked exactly the way it had when she'd first moved in, neat, organized, and entirely hers. She sat down at the kitchen table and made a list of practical tasks. Change her relationship status on social media. Remove Nolan from her emergency contact information at work. Cancel the streaming services he used but never paid for. Small administrative details that would erase him from her daily life bit by bit. Her phone rang. Casey's name appeared on the screen. How are you holding up? Casey asked. Good. Better than I expected. Did you really change the locks? Last night, and I packed all his stuff this morning. Where did you put it? Storage unit. Paid for 1 month. Casey was quiet for a moment. That's either the smartest thing you've ever done or the craziest. Maybe both. When is he coming back? I don't know. He said it was a weekend trip, so probably tonight or tomorrow. Do you want company when he shows up? Marissa considered the offer. Part of her wanted backup, someone to witness whatever scene Nolan was going to make when he realized what she'd done. But another part of her knew this was something she had to handle alone. I think I need to do this myself, she said. Okay, but promise me you'll call if you need anything, or if he gets scary. I promise. And Marissa, I'm really proud of you. This took guts. After they hung up, Marissa spent the afternoon doing normal Sunday things. She went grocery shopping and bought only foods she actually wanted to eat. She did laundry and enjoyed having the washing machine to herself. She watched a movie on Netflix without having to negotiate what to watch or listen to complaints about her choice. By evening, she felt more settled in her own skin than she had in months. The apartment was quiet but not empty, peaceful but not lonely. She made dinner for one person and ate it at the kitchen table while reading a book she'd been trying to finish for weeks. No interruptions, no questions about when she was going to bed or what time she had to work tomorrow. Just her in her own space, living her own life. Around 9 o'clock, she heard footsteps on the stairs outside. Her heart rate picked up, thinking it might be Nolan coming home early. But the footsteps passed her door and continued up to the 3rd floor. She realized she was holding her breath and forced herself to exhale slowly. He would come back eventually, and when he did, she would handle it. But tonight, she could just enjoy the peace. Monday morning brought rain and the kind of gray sky that made everything look washed out. Marissa got up early for her shift at the hospital. Feeling more energetic than she had in weeks despite the weather, she made coffee in her quiet kitchen and ate breakfast standing at the counter, watching raindrops streak down the window. The parking lot below was already half empty as people left for work. The hospital. Dr. Peterson noticed the change in her demeanor immediately. You seem different today, he said as they reviewed patient charts. More focused. I slept well this weekend. Good. You've been looking tired lately. The morning passed quickly with the usual rotation of patients. A construction worker with a broken finger, an elderly woman with chest pains that turned out to be heartburn, a teenager who'd tried to pierce her own ears and given herself an infection. During her lunch break, Marissa sat in the hospital cafeteria and checked her phone. No messages from Nolan, which either meant he was still with whoever he'd gone away with or he hadn't tried to come home yet. She opened Facebook and changed her relationship status from in a relationship to single. The platform asked if she wanted to share the update with her friends. She clicked no. Then she went through her photos and deleted the ones of her and Nolan together. 2 years of couple selfies and dinner dates and weekend trips. Erased with a few taps of her finger. It felt surprisingly liberating. Her shift ended at 6, but she stayed late to help train a new nurse who'd just started in the ER. By the time she got home, it was almost 8 o'clock and the rain had stopped, leaving everything smelling fresh and clean. The parking lot was fuller now as people came home from work. She recognized most of the cars, the blue sedan that belonged to the single mother on the first floor, the pickup truck owned by the college student who worked nights at a warehouse, and red SUV. No sign that Nolan had returned. Marissa climbed the stairs to her apartment, keys already in her hand. The new lock turned smoothly, and she felt a small surge of satisfaction at the solid click it made. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Clean surfaces, organized spaces, no surprises waiting for her. She changed out of her scrubs and made a simple dinner of pasta and salad. While she ate, she scrolled through news websites and caught up on current events she'd been too distracted to follow recently. Around 9:30, she heard voices in the parking lot below. Through the window, she could see a man and woman arguing next to a red SUV. Even from 2 floors up, she could tell the man was agitated, gesturing wildly while the woman stood with her arms crossed. The woman got into the SUV and drove away, tires squealing. The man stood alone in the parking lot for a moment before walking toward the building. Marissa turned off the lights and moved away from the window. A few minutes later, she heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The footsteps stopped outside her door. The key scraped against the lock. Metal on metal. Once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. What the hell? Nolan's voice was muffled, but clearly angry. More scraping. The doorknob rattled violently. Marissa! He pounded on the door with his fist. Open up. My key doesn't work. She stayed perfectly still on the couch, heart hammering in her chest. Part of her wanted to open the door and explain what she'd done, but a larger part knew that nothing she could say would make this conversation go well. Marissa, I know you're in there. What did you do to the lock? The pounding got louder. Other doors in the hallway started opening as neighbors came out to see what was causing the commotion. Hey man, keep it down, someone said. People are trying to sleep. This is my apartment. Nolan's voice was getting higher, more desperate. She changed the locks. She can't do that. Actually, I think she can, said a woman's voice. Ivy. Marissa crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Ivy was standing in her doorway across the hall, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt. She looked completely calm despite the chaos. This is none of your business, Nolan said. You're making it everyone's business by yelling in the hallway. Where is she? I know she's in there. I wouldn't know, but I do have something for you. Ivy disappeared into her apartment and came back with a small envelope. Storage unit address and key. Your stuff is there. Nolan snatched the envelope and tore it open. Through the peephole, Marissa could see his face getting redder as he read the contents. She put my stuff in storage? Without telling me. Looks that way. She can't do that. Half that stuff is mine. Then I guess you better go get it. Nolan crumpled the paper and threw it on the floor. This is insane. We had a fight, so she locks me out? Over what? Asking her not to be so controlling. I don't know anything about your fight, Ivy said, but I saw you leave Saturday morning with another woman, so maybe that has something to do with it. The hallway went completely quiet. Even Nolan stopped talking. That's? He started. None of my business, I know, but it's probably her business. Ivy stepped back toward her door. You should get your stuff and find somewhere else to stay tonight. Maybe permanently. You don't understand. She's overreacting. I can explain. Then explain it to her tomorrow when she's had time to cool down. Right now you're just making things worse. Nolan picked up the crumpled paper and smoothed it out. What storage place is this? Address is right there. They're open until 10. Marissa watched him read the information again, his face cycling through emotions she knew well: anger, confusion, the dawning realization that he'd miscalculated something important. This is crazy, he muttered. Over one weekend. Was it just one weekend? Ivy asked quietly. Nolan didn't answer. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket, then walked back down the stairs without saying goodbye. Marissa waited until she heard a car engine start in the parking lot before moving away from the door. Through the window, she saw Nolan's truck pull out of the parking space, followed immediately by the red SUV. He'd called someone to pick him up. Someone who'd been waiting in the parking lot while he tried to get into the apartment. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. Coast is clear. You okay in there? She opened the door. Ivy was still standing in her doorway, looking satisfied with herself. Thank you, Marissa said. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. That's what neighbors are for. Ivy smiled. Besides, someone needed to tell him the truth about what everyone already knows. What do you mean? About the other women. Plural. You think this is the first time I've seen him leave with someone who wasn't you? Marissa felt something cold settle in her stomach. How many times? Enough that I started paying attention. I was wondering when you were going to notice. They stood in the hallway for a moment, processing the weight of what Ivy had just revealed. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Marissa asked. Would you have believed me? The honest answer was probably not. A month ago, even a week ago, she would have found excuses for Nolan's behavior. She would have told herself that Ivy was mistaken or gossiping or stirring up trouble. You're right, she said. I wouldn't have. But you're ready to believe it now. Yeah, I am. Ivy nodded toward Marissa's apartment. How are you feeling about all this? Scared, but also relieved. Marissa thought about it. Like I finally stopped pretending something was different than it actually was. That's the hard part, admitting you were wrong about someone. Were you ever married? Marissa asked. For about 5 minutes. My ex-husband had a gambling problem, he forgot to mention. Ivy shrugged. Took me 3 years to stop making excuses for him and another 2 to actually leave. Do you regret staying as long as you did? Every day. But I learned something important: the longer you wait to leave, the harder it gets. You start thinking you've invested too much time to quit now. Marissa knew exactly what she meant. Over the past 2 years, she'd stayed with Nolan partly because leaving felt like admitting she'd wasted all that time. But the truth was, every additional day she stayed would have been another day wasted. Get some rest, Ivy said. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Why? Because now he knows you're serious. And men like Nolan don't give up that easily. While Marissa was changing locks and packing boxes, Nolan's weekend was falling apart in ways he hadn't anticipated. What had started as a simple getaway with Brenna Morrison, a 26-year-old bartender he'd been seeing for 3 months, had turned into a disaster of his own making. Saturday afternoon found them at a cabin near Lake Norman that belonged to Brenna's friend. The plan had been simple: spend the weekend away from their respective complications and just have fun. No commitments, no questions, no drama. But Nolan had made the mistake of getting too comfortable, too careless with his lies. When Brenna asked about his living situation, he told her he was between places and staying with a friend temporarily. When she asked about his Facebook relationship status, he said he'd been meaning to update it after his recent breakup. Small lies that were easy to keep track of until Sunday morning, when Brenna couldn't sleep and decided to do some social media stalking, that she'd been curious about him for weeks, but had respected his request to take things slow and not dig too deep into his personal life. But lying in bed next to him at 6 a.m., listening to him snore, She'd opened Facebook and searched for Nolan Harker, Charlotte, North Carolina. His profile came up immediately, still showing in a relationship with Marissa Caldwell. Curious, she clicked on Marissa's profile. The photos told a story Nolan had never mentioned. Couple pictures dating back 2 years. Holiday photos, birthday celebrations, casual weekend shots that looked like a real relationship. Not a casual thing that had ended months ago. The most recent photo had been posted just 3 weeks ago. Nolan and Marissa at dinner, both smiling, her hand resting on his arm. The caption read, "Date night with my favorite person." Brenna felt sick. She'd been the other woman without knowing it. She got dressed quietly and walked outside to call her sister. "You need to pick me up," she said when Katie answered. "What happened? Are you okay?" He lied. About everything. He has a live-in girlfriend. "Oh, honey, are you sure?" "I'm looking at 2 years of photos on Facebook. They went to Casey's wedding last month together." Katie was quiet for a moment. "Do you want me to come get you now?" "Yes, but I need to do something first." Brenna went back inside and shook Nolan awake. "We need to talk," she said. Nolan opened his eyes and smiled the lazy smile that had first attracted her attention at the bar where she worked. "Morning, beautiful. Come back to bed. Sit up." Something in her voice made him alert. "What's wrong?" "Tell me about Marissa." All the color drained from his face. "What?" "Marissa Caldwell. Your girlfriend of 2 years." Nolan sat up slowly, running his hands through his hair. "Brenna, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you lied about being single? That you lied about living alone? That you brought me here while she thinks you're camping with friends? It's complicated." "No, it's not. It's actually very simple. You're a cheater, and I'm done being part of it." Nolan got out of bed and reached for his clothes. "Look, Marissa and we're not really together anymore. We're just roommates at this point. Your Facebook says otherwise. Social media doesn't mean anything." The photos from last month suggest it means something to her. Brenna watched him get dressed, noting how different he looked when he was cornered. Smaller somehow, less confident. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I just needed to figure out how to end things with her first." "When?" "After another 3 months of sneaking around." "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Nolan?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're using both of us." He finished getting dressed and turned to face her. For a moment, she thought he might actually tell her the truth. But instead, he fell back on the same charm that had gotten him into this situation. "You're right to be angry," he said. "I should have been honest from the beginning. But I was afraid you wouldn't give me a chance if you knew how complicated things were." "You were right. I wouldn't have." "So what happens now?" Brenna really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time. He wasn't the sweet, uncomplicated guy she'd thought she was falling for. He was a man who made selfish choices and expected other people to deal with the consequences. "Now you get your stuff and find your own way home," she said. "I'm blocking your number and pretending this weekend never happened." "Brenna, please. Can't we talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice when you decided to lie to me." She walked outside to wait for her sister, leaving Nolan alone in the cabin with his duffel bag and no way to get back to Charlotte. When Katie arrived 30 minutes later, Brenna was sitting on the front steps with her overnight bag, looking tired but resolved. "You okay?" Katie asked. "I will be." They drove away without looking back, leaving Nolan to figure out his own transportation. It took him 3 hours and $40 in Uber fees to get home. Plenty of time to think about how badly he'd miscalculated the situation. During the ride, he crafted a dozen different explanations for where he'd been. A last-minute camping trip with the guys. A work emergency that had kept him away. A family situation that he couldn't talk about. But as they got closer to Charlotte, he realized he might not need any of those stories. Marissa had been pulling away from him for weeks, working extra shifts and going to bed early and generally acting like she didn't want to spend time with him. Maybe she'd be relieved that he'd given her some space. Maybe they could use this as a starting point for an honest conversation about where their relationship was going. By the time the Uber dropped him off at the apartment complex, Nolan had almost convinced himself that everything would work out fine. Sure, he'd have to do some damage control with Brenna, but she'd get over it eventually. And Marissa would understand that he'd just needed some time to think, that he'd never been good at reading situations, especially when those situations involved the consequences of his own actions. It was a blind spot that had gotten him in trouble before and would again. But as he climbed the stairs to apartment 2B, his key ready in his hand, Nolan had no idea that his casual weekend away had set in motion a series of events that would change his life completely. The key that had always worked before suddenly didn't fit. And in that moment of confusion and growing panic, Nolan began to understand that some mistakes can't be explained away or charmed out of existence. Some mistakes cost you everything. Tuesday afternoon brought unseasonably warm weather that made everyone at the hospital cranky. The ER was busier than usual with people who'd spent too much time in the sun or tried to do yard work they weren't in shape for. Marissa had just finished treating a man who'd managed to cut his hand with hedge trimmers when her phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. He's back. Heading upstairs now. She looked at the clock on the break room wall. 3:15. Her shift didn't end until 7, which meant she wouldn't be home to witness whatever scene Nolan was about to make. Maybe that was better. Let him discover the situation on his own, without her there to absorb his initial reaction. Everything okay? Dr. Peterson asked, noticing her checking her phone. Just a neighbor letting me know about a package delivery, she lied. The rest of her shift passed slowly, each patient taking longer than usual, every procedure requiring extra steps. Marissa found herself distracted, wondering what was happening at the apartment complex. BY 6:30. She'd received 3 more texts from Ivy with increasingly detailed updates. He tried his key for 5 minutes before giving up. Now he's walking around the building looking for another way in. Security guard told him to stop trying to climb the fire escape. At 7 o'clock sharp, Marissa clocked out and drove home through rush hour traffic that seemed designed to test her patience. Every red light lasted forever. Every merge took twice as long as it should have. When she finally pulled into the parking lot, she could see Nolan's truck parked in a visitor spot near the dumpsters. He was sitting on the tailgate talking on his phone, gesturing wildly with his free hand. Marissa parked in her assigned space and sat in her car for a moment, watching him through her rearview mirror. Even from a distance, she could tell he was agitated. His whole body language screamed frustration and confusion. She got out of her car and walked toward the building entrance, keys already in her hand. Nolan saw her and jumped down from his truck. Marissa, thank God. What happened to the locks? She turned to face him, noting how different he looked after 3 days away. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was messy, and he had the slightly desperate look of someone who'd been sleeping in his car. I changed them, she said simply. Why? Because I wanted to. Nolan stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. You can't just change the locks. I live here. No, you don't. Your name isn't on the lease. You don't pay rent. You don't pay utilities. You're just someone who's been staying here. That's not. We've been together for 2 years. This is our apartment. It's my apartment. It always has been. Other residents were starting to notice the conversation, slowing down as they passed to hear what was happening. Marissa felt exposed standing in the parking lot having this discussion, but she also felt strangely calm. Can we go inside and talk about this? Nolan asked. No. What do you mean, no? I mean, no, you can't come inside. Your key doesn't work anymore, remember? Nolan's face was getting red, the way it always did when he wasn't getting what he wanted. This is crazy. You're acting crazy. I'm acting logical. Logical. His voice was getting louder. You lock your boyfriend out of his own home because you're mad about a camping trip? I'm not mad about a camping trip. I'm done pretending we have a relationship when we clearly don't. What are you talking about? Of course we have a relationship. Marissa looked at him carefully, trying to see if there was any genuine confusion in his expression or if this was just another performance. Friday night you told me I don't get a say in your life, she said. So I took you out of mine. I didn't mean it like that. I was just frustrated. You meant it exactly like that, and I agreed with you. A few more people had stopped to watch, including Mrs. Chin from the first floor, who always knew everyone's business. Marissa realized this conversation was going to be the talk of the complex within hours. Look, Nolan said, lowering his voice and trying to step closer to her. We both said things we didn't mean. Let's go upstairs and work this out like adults. I said exactly what I meant, and apparently so did you. Where's my stuff? Storage unit. Your neighbor gave you the information yesterday. I know about the storage unit. I went there. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to find your belongings in a concrete box, like you're some kind of deadbeat? Marissa almost laughed. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to find out your boyfriend is cheating on you from the neighbor who saw him leave with another woman? The parking lot went completely quiet. Even the people who'd been pretending not to listen stopped talking. Nolan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. It wasn't what? Cheating? Because you went away for the weekend with someone who wasn't me. It was just a friend. A friend who picked you up at 6 a.m. on Saturday in her red SUV and spent the weekend with you at a cabin. How do you know about the cabin? The question hung in the air between them, like a confession. Marissa felt something settle in her chest, final and decisive. Thank you for being honest, she said. Finally. Nolan realized his mistake immediately. Marissa, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You made your position clear Friday night, and you've been making it clear for months with your actions. I love you. The words sounded hollow, desperate, like something he'd read in a script. No, you don't, Marissa said. You love having someone to pay your bills and clean up after you and be available whenever you need something. But you don't love me. That's not true. When's my birthday? What? My birthday. When is it? Nolan stared at her, panic flickering in his eyes. Your birthday it's in the summer. It's October 15th. We've been together for 2 years, and you don't know when my birthday is. A woman in the growing crowd of observers made a small sound of sympathy. Someone else whispered, Oh, honey. What's my middle name? Marissa continued, What's my favorite color? What am I allergic to? This isn't fair. You're putting me on the spot. I'm asking you basic questions about someone you claim to love. Nolan looked around at the faces watching them, realizing he was losing whatever sympathy the crowd might have had for him. Fine, he said. Maybe I don't know everything about you, but relationships are about more than memorizing facts. You're right. They're about respect and honesty and actually caring about the other person's feelings, none of which you've shown me. I do care about your feelings. Then why did you tell me I don't get a say in your life? Because you were being controlling, asking where I was going, who I was with. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I asked you one question about your weekend plans. That's not controlling, that's normal. You're always checking up on me. I asked you to text me when you got to work safely because your truck breaks down twice a month. I asked you to let me know if you were going to be late because I cook dinner. Those aren't controlling behaviors. They're what people do when they care about each other. Marissa could see that some part of Nolan understood what she was saying, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. So what now? He asked. You're just done? 2 years don't mean anything. 2 years of me taking care of you while you did whatever you wanted? No, That doesn't mean anything anymore. I took care of you too. When? Name one time you took care of me. Nolan opened his mouth to answer and then closed it again. The silence stretched out uncomfortably. I helped with things, he finally said. What things? I don't remember specific examples, but I helped. A man in the crowd shook his head and walked away, apparently having heard enough. Mrs. Chin made a disgusted sound and headed toward the building entrance. Get your things from the storage unit, Marissa said. You have until the end of the month. Then what? Then it's not my problem anymore. She turned and walked toward the building, feeling 20 pairs of eyes watching her. Behind her, she could hear Nolan calling her name, but she didn't turn around at I in the lobby. She nearly ran into Ivy, who was checking her mailbox. How did it go? Ivy asked. About as well as expected. He's still out there talking to himself, by the way. Through the lobby window, they could see Nolan pacing next to his truck, phone pressed to his ear. Probably calling someone to complain about how crazy I am, Marissa said. Let him. Everyone who is watching knows the truth. They walked upstairs together, and Marissa felt grateful for Ivy's steady presence. It helped counteract the adrenaline crash she could feel coming. You did good, Ivy said as they reached their floor. That couldn't have been easy. It was easier than I thought it would be, Marissa said. Once I started talking, I realized I'd been wanting to say those things for a long time. The hardest part is over. Marissa unlocked her door with the new key, enjoying the solid click it made. Is it though? He's not going to just disappear. Probably not. But now everyone knows what kind of person he is. That makes it harder for him to play the victim. Inside her apartment, Marissa made dinner and tried to process what had just happened. The confrontation had felt surreal, like she was watching someone else have the conversation she'd been avoiding for months, but it was done. Whatever happened next, she'd made her position clear. There would be no going back to the way things had been. No pretending they could work through this like a normal couple having a normal disagreement. She'd drawn a line, and she intended to stay on the right side of it. Wednesday morning brought news that spread through their social circle like wildfire. Marissa woke up to 17 text messages, 12 missed calls, and a Facebook notification that made her stomach drop. Nolan had posted in their group chat at 3 a.m. a long, rambling message that painted her as an unstable woman who'd lost her mind over a simple weekend away with friends. Can't believe what I came home to, the message read. 2 years together and she locks me out over nothing. Changed the locks, put my stuff in storage, all because I went camping for the weekend. I tried to talk to her, but she's completely irrational. Some of you saw what happened in the parking lot. This is what I've been dealing with. Marissa read the message twice, feeling her anger build with each word. He'd managed to make himself sound like the victim of an unhinged ex-girlfriend, conveniently leaving out the part about spending the weekend with another woman. But as she scrolled through the responses, she realized his strategy had backfired. Casey had responded first. Nolan, that's not what happened, and you know it. Then Lyle. Dude, everyone knows you weren't camping. Jake, who rarely got involved in drama. Maybe don't cheat on your girlfriend if you want to keep living with her. The responses kept coming, each one less sympathetic than the last. Their entire friend group had apparently been aware of Nolan's behavior for months, just waiting for someone to call him out on it. Marissa made coffee and sat at her kitchen table, reading through the messages and trying to decide how to respond. She could ignore the whole thing and let other people defend her, or she could set the record straight herself. She chose the third option. Opening her laptop, she found the folder where she'd saved screenshots months ago, back when she first started suspecting Nolan was seeing someone else. Text messages between him and various women, found on the laptop he'd left logged into Facebook on. Photos from his phone that he'd backed up to their shared cloud storage. Without thinking about it, she'd collected the evidence without knowing what she planned to do with it, driven by some instinct that told her she might need proof someday. Today was that day. She selected the most damning screenshots messages with 3 different women over the past 6 months, including detailed plans for the weekend trip with Brenna. Nothing X-rated or inappropriate for social media. Just clear evidence that he'd been lying to everyone. Then she typed a response to the group chat. Since Nolan wants to discuss our relationship publicly, here's the full story. These are screenshots from his own phone and laptop. You can decide for yourselves who is being irrational. I changed the locks because I refuse to live with someone who lies to my face and expects me to pay his bills while he cheats. 2 years was long enough to waste on someone who never respected me or our relationship. She attached the screenshots and hit send before she could change her mind. Her phone started ringing immediately. Casey's name appeared on the screen. "Holy shit," Casey said when Marissa answered. "You had proof this whole time." "I've had suspicious for months. I just wasn't ready to do anything about it." These screenshots are, wow. He was planning this trip with Brenna for weeks. I know. And look at this message to Tiffany from last month. He told her he was single. Marissa had seen that message. It was one of several where Nolan had claimed to be newly single and looking for something casual. "I can't believe you've been dealing with this by yourself," Casey said. "I wasn't ready to admit it was happening. It's embarrassing to find out you've been played for that long. You're not the one who should be embarrassed. He is." While they talked, more responses appeared in the group chat. The tone had shifted completely from Nolan's original attempt to control the narrative. "I'm so sorry, Marissa. We should have said something sooner. Emma, good for you for standing up for yourself. David Nolan, you need to take responsibility for your actions instead of blaming everyone else." Rachel, the most surprising response came from Marcus, who'd been Nolan's friend longer than anyone. "Man, I tried to warn you this would catch up with you eventually. You can't treat people like this and expect it to end well." By noon, the group chat had effectively turned into a public referendum on Nolan's behavior, with former friends sharing their own stories about lies he'd told and boundaries he'd crossed. "He borrowed $300 from me last year and never paid it back," wrote Tyler. "Said Marissa was handling his finances and she'd send me a check. Never happened." "He hit on my sister at my birthday party," added Jenna, while Marissa was standing right there. "He asked me to lie to Marissa about where he was one night," said Kevin. "I told him to handle his own relationship problems." Reading through the messages, Marissa realized that everyone in their social circle had been protecting her by keeping quiet about things they'd seen or heard. But their silence had also enabled Nolan to continue his behavior without consequences. Her phone rang again. This time it was her mother. "I saw your Facebook post," her mother said without preamble. "Are you okay?" Marissa had forgotten that her mother was connected to some of their mutual friends online. The screenshots had probably made their way through the entire extended network by now. "I'm okay, Mom. Actually, I'm better than I've been in months." "Good. I was worried about you and that boy. He never seemed like he was taking things seriously." "He wasn't." "Are you going to be able to afford the apartment on your own?" "I've been affording it on my own for 2 years. It'll actually be easier without him eating my food and running up the electric bill." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. I know that wasn't easy." "It was easier than I thought it would be. The hardest part is usually admitting you made a mistake in the first place." After they hung up, Marissa went back to the group chat. Nolan had finally responded to the screenshots, but his message was short and defensive. There are 2 sides to every story. Those messages are taken out of context. Nobody bought it. The responses came quickly and weren't kind. What context makes, "Tell her we're just friends, okay?" Casey, which part of "I'm single now" was taken out of context? "Lyle, just stop, man. You're making it worse." Marcus, around 3 o'clock, Marissa's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. but curiosity got the better of her. Is this Marissa? The voice was female, young and nervous. Yes. Who is this? This is Brenna. I think we need to talk. Marissa felt her stomach drop. This was not a conversation she'd been prepared for. Okay, she said carefully. I saw the screenshots in your group chat. My friends know your friends. And, look, I didn't know about you. I swear I didn't know he had a girlfriend. How long were you seeing him? 3 months. He told me he was single, recently out of a bad relationship, but ready to move on. Despite everything, Marissa felt sorry for the woman on the phone. She sounded young and hurt and genuinely surprised by what she'd learned. I'm sorry, Brenna continued. I would never have gotten involved if I'd known the truth. It's not your fault. He lied to both of us. I ended things Sunday morning when I figured out what was going on, but I wanted to call and apologize anyway. Thank you for that. For what it's worth, you're better off without him. He's selfish and immature, and he has no idea how to treat people. After Brenna hung up, Marissa sat in her quiet apartment and marveled at how quickly everything had changed. 24 hours ago, she was the woman whose boyfriend had mysteriously disappeared for the weekend. Now she was the woman who'd exposed a cheater to their entire social circle and gained the respect of people who'd been watching her make excuses for him for months. Her phone buzzed with one final message in the group chat, this one from Nolan. Whatever. You all made up your minds anyway. Thanks for the support, friends. And then he left the group entirely. The silence that followed felt final, like the closing of a door that had been stuck open too long. Casey texted her privately, How are you holding up? Good, Marissa typed back. Really good. And for the first time in months, she meant it completely. Friday evening brought the kind of autumn weather that made Charlotte beautiful, crisp air, clear skies, and the promise of a weekend that belonged entirely to her. Marissa finished her shift at the hospital feeling lighter than she had in years. The past few days had been surprisingly peaceful. No angry phone calls from Nolan. No attempts to contact her through mutual friends. No dramatic gestures or demands for closure. She'd started to think he'd finally accepted that their relationship was over. She should have known better as she walked through the hospital parking garage to her car. She noticed someone sitting on the hood of her Honda. Even in the dim fluorescent lighting, she recognized Nolan's silhouette immediately. Her first instinct was to turn around and go back inside, maybe call security. But then she realized she was tired of avoiding confrontations and hiding from problems. If he wanted to talk, they could talk. But it would be on her terms. She walked toward her car, keys in her hand and phone, ready to dial 911 if things got out of control. Hi, Nolan said as she approached. He slid off the hood and stood awkwardly beside the driver's door. I've been waiting for you. I can see that. Up close, he looked terrible. His clothes were wrinkled like he'd been sleeping in them, his hair was greasy, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been eating or sleeping regularly. We need to talk, he said. We talked Tuesday, in front of half the apartment complex. That wasn't really talking. That was you publicly humiliating me. Marissa stopped about 6 feet away from him, close enough to have a conversation, but far enough to run if she needed to. I told the truth about our relationship. If that was humiliating, maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to cheat. I made mistakes. I know that. But what you did with those screenshots, telling everyone our business, that was cruel. What was cruel was lying to me for months while you slept with other women. Nolan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing, but now just looked pathetic. Look, I know I screwed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling or something. There's nothing to fix. We're done. You don't mean that. I mean it completely. He stepped closer to her, and she instinctively stepped back. Marissa, please. I love you. I know I haven't been perfect, but I'm willing to work on myself. We can start over. You don't love me. You've never loved me. You don't even know me. That's not true. When's my birthday? Your birthday. He looked genuinely confused, like she was asking him to solve calculus. Why are you asking that again? Because someone who loves me would know when I was born. That doesn't prove anything. I'm bad with dates. What's my favorite book? We don't really talk about books. My favorite movie. You like romantic comedies. Name one. Nolan stared at her, panic flickering across his face. This is stupid. Relationships aren't about memorizing trivia. You're right. They're about paying attention to the person you claim to love. They're about caring enough to remember things that matter to them. She could see him struggling to find an answer that would satisfy her, but there wasn't one. After 2 years together, he knew almost nothing about her interests, her dreams, her fears, or her hopes. He'd never bothered to ask. I can learn those things, he said desperately. Give me another chance, and I'll pay attention. You had 2 years to pay attention. I was going through my own stuff. My job, my family problems. All that stress with my truck breaking down. I was distracted. Everyone has stress, Nolan. That doesn't give you the right to treat people badly. A security guard walked through the parking garage, making his evening rounds. He nodded at Marissa and continued on, but she felt better knowing someone else was nearby. What about everything we built together? Nolan asked. 2 years doesn't just disappear because I made some mistakes. What exactly did we build? I paid rent, you lived there. I bought furniture, you used it. I cooked dinner, you ate it. I did laundry, you wore clean clothes. What part of that was you building something? I was there for you when you had hard days at work. Were you? Because I remember coming home stressed and having you complain that I was bringing negative energy into the apartment. I remember you telling me I worked too much and needed to relax, but never offering to help with anything that would actually reduce my stress. Nolan's face was getting red, the way it always did when he was losing an argument. Fine, maybe I wasn't perfect, but neither were you. You were controlling and suspicious and always questioning everything I did. I asked you where you were going because I cared about you. I questioned things because your stories didn't add up. And apparently I was right to be suspicious. You went through my phone. You left your laptop logged into Facebook and your phone connected to our shared cloud storage. I didn't go through anything. Your messages just appeared in my notifications. That's still a violation of privacy. Marissa almost laughed. You're seriously going to talk to me about violations of privacy? You told 3 different women you were single while living in my apartment. That was different. How? I was confused about where we stood. You were always working. We barely spent time together. It felt like we were just roommates. So instead of talking to me about how you felt, you decided to date other people. I wasn't dating them. I was just exploring my options. The casual cruelty of that phrase hit her like a physical blow. Exploring his options. Like she was a backup plan while he shopped around for something better. Get away from my car, she said. What? Move. Now. Something in her voice made him step aside. She unlocked her door and threw her purse into the passenger seat. Where are you going? He asked. Home. To my apartment, where you don't live anymore. Marissa, please. Can't we just try to work this out? I'll do whatever you want. She turned to face him one last time. You want to know what I want? I want you to get your things from storage and find somewhere else to live. I want you to stop telling people I'm crazy because I won't let you use me anymore. And I want you to leave me alone. I can't just forget about you. Then that's your problem to solve. She got into her car and started the engine. Through the windshield, she could see Nolan standing in the parking spot, looking lost and defeated. Part of her felt sorry for him. He genuinely seemed confused by the idea that actions had consequences, that treating people badly would eventually result in those people walking away. But a larger part of her felt relieved. This conversation had confirmed everything she'd realized over the past week. Nolan didn't love her, he loved the convenience she provided. He didn't want to be with her, he wanted to own her while keeping his options open. That she'd wasted 2 years trying to build a relationship with someone who was fundamentally incapable of being a partner. But she wasn't going to waste another day. As she drove out of the parking garage, she caught a glimpse of Nolan in her rearview mirror. He was standing in the same spot, staring after her car like he couldn't quite believe she was really leaving. But she was. Finally, completely, and with no intention of looking back, the city lights streaked past her windows as she drove home to her own apartment, her own life, and her own future. For the first time in months, that future looked bright. 3 months later, Marissa was leaving the hospital after a double shift when Ivy called. "I have gossip," Ivy announced without preamble. "I'm listening." "Nolan got evicted from that apartment he rented across town. I saw him loading boxes into his truck yesterday afternoon." Marissa felt a small pang of something that might have been sympathy, but it passed quickly. "How do you know all this?" "My cousin lives in the same complex. Says he's been behind on rent since he moved in, and the landlord finally had enough." "Where is he going?" "Word is he's moving back in with his mother." At 33 years old, Nolan was going home to live with his mother because he'd never learned to take care of himself. It would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. "He looks different too," Ivy continued. "Smaller somehow, like he's shrinking." "That's not my problem anymore," Marissa said, and she meant it completely. The truth was, she rarely thought about Nolan these days except when someone brought him up. Her life had expanded to fill the space he'd once occupied, and she discovered that space was much larger than she'd realized. That she'd taken up painting again, something she'd abandoned in college but had always missed. She'd started reading books that interested her instead of watching whatever was on TV. She'd begun saying yes to social invitations instead of making excuses about being tired or busy. Most importantly, she'd learned to enjoy her own company. Her apartment felt like home in a way it never had when Nolan lived there. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every small decision reflected her taste and her choices. "You sound good," Ivy said. "Happy." "I am happy." "Any regrets?" Marissa considered the question as she unlocked her car. Did she regret the time she'd spent with Nolan? The money she'd wasted on someone who'd never appreciated it? The opportunities she'd missed while trying to fix a relationship that had been broken from the start? "Only that I didn't do it sooner," she said. After they hung up, she drove home through the city she was learning to navigate on her own terms. At red lights, she looked at other drivers and wondered about their lives, their stories, their own moments of decision that had brought them to where they were today, at her apartment complex. She parked in the same spot she'd always used, but noticed how different everything looked now. The building that had once felt temporary, like a place she was staying until her real life began, now felt like home. She climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, her key already in her hand. The lock turned smoothly, with a solid click that still gave her satisfaction months later. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Clean surfaces, organized spaces, and the peaceful quiet of a home that belonged entirely to her. She made dinner for one and ate it at her kitchen table while reading a book she'd chosen because it sounded interesting, not because someone else wanted to watch TV. After dinner, she painted for an hour, working on a landscape that was slowly taking shape on her easel by the window. Around 9 o'clock, her phone rang. For just a moment, her heart jumped, thinking it might be Nolan calling to apologize or explain or ask for another chance. But the number on the screen belonged to Casey. "Want to go out tomorrow night?" Casey asked. "There's a new restaurant downtown that's supposed to be amazing. Just us. Me and Lyle. You and whoever you want to bring. Or just you. We miss hanging out with you." Marissa realized it had been weeks since she'd socialized with couples. partly because she'd gotten used to thinking of herself as incomplete without a partner. But sitting in her own space, surrounded by her own choices, she felt anything but incomplete. "Just me sounds perfect," she said. After they made plans, she sat on her couch and looked around the apartment that had become her sanctuary. Everything in this space reflected who she was and what she valued. The books on the shelves, the paintings on the walls, the way the furniture was arranged, all of it was hers. For 2 years, she'd shared the space with someone who'd never appreciated it or contributed to it in any meaningful way. Someone who'd treated it like a free hotel room while he figured out what he really wanted. But now it was hers alone, and she'd never been happier. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of people living their lives, car doors closing, voices in the hallway, the distant hum of traffic. Normal sounds of a normal evening in a normal life, her normal life. Finally, she picked up her book and settled back into the couch, her reading lamp casting a warm circle of light around her. Tomorrow she would work her shift at the hospital, helping people through their emergencies and crises. Tomorrow night she would have dinner with friends who valued her company, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged in her own space, living her own life, holding the keys to her own future. The key that had fit Nolan's idea of their relationship, the one where she did all the work while he did whatever he wanted, didn't fit anymore. She'd changed the locks on more than just her apartment. She'd changed the entire structure of her life, and for the first time in years, everything fit perfectly.